Perfect. So just to give you a little background on the series, if you're new to us this week, so each week we will be joined by a new sustainability professional to just explore a different topic related to waste. Our hosts will spend a couple minutes talking about the topic, and then we'll start posing some questions to me and to Leanna Hauser from the Homewood Recycling office as well. And then we're going to open it up to everybody to start chatting. Today's event is going to be slightly different than last time. We're not going to ask you to raise your hand. If you have something that you want to audibly share with the group, feel free to just unmute yourself. Try to be courteous and not talk over other people. Feel free to unmute yourself and just share with the group throughout the event. If there's something you want to add in at a certain point and you feel kind of uncomfortable doing that, feel free to raise your hand, but also feel free to just go ahead and talk. Again, please use the chat room. We want you to have the opportunity to share your thoughts and ideas. So utilize that space. We'll be checking it frequently. If there's anything that comes up there that is super relevant or interesting to add to the conversation, Leanna or I will do that. But also, just as a reminder, keep yourself muted. Otherwise, just to help prevent a lot of background noise. So as I do our introductions, again, if you haven't finished the poll, please finish filling out the polling information.
Real quick, it seems like the last question only lets you use one option instead of multiple options. So
oh, I'm sorry.
pick the most relevant one.
There you go. Thank you for mentioning that, Leanna. So I apologize about that. Just pick one, at least you've done, and it'll give us a good basis. Other housekeeping notes. The event is being recorded, as I already mentioned. Please introduce yourself in the chat room and share, your name, what school or organization you're from. And if you're having any technical issues or anything else that you notice that's being weird, put it in the chat room and we'll get it handled. So our co-host for today's event is Cathy Liebowitz from College of Holy Cross, and our topic is going to be the relationship between waste reduction and service. So is the first director of sustainability at the College of Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. She is taking her experience overseeing a $1.1 million green fund, reviving student engagement programming, and managing service learning opportunities to empower the Holy Cross community towards its goal to become a carbon neutral university or college by 2040. She completed her bachelor's degree in environmental studies from Dartmouth College before completing her master's in higher education at the University of Maryland in College Park. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start our conversation on the discussion the relationship between waste reduction and service. Welcome, Cathy.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Yeah, so something about Holy Cross is one of our values is this idea of for and with others. And it's a lot about service. It's service for yourself, it's service for your community, it's service for your family. And being virtual right now, I've been thinking a lot about engagement and what service really means. And when I think about service, especially when it comes to waste, I'm talking about all different levels. I'm thinking the ongoing weekly volunteer at a repair shop or a thrift store. I'm thinking about the individual that sorts through all the waste in the workplace. We all have that person that goes into the break room and is like looking for all those plastic bottles. That's still service, and they're super important to the waste reduction movement. And I think of all the different programs that are really pushing for waste reduction, and a lot of them really rely heavily on volunteers. So I think of move out programs at universities and colleges where we're relying on students to drop their stuff off in certain locations. We're relying on volunteers to pick that stuff up. We're hoping that partners can use this stuff that we're giving in a valuable way. The Food Recovery Network there's like various pieces of that puzzle that make waste reduction work. There's the school offering their leftovers, it's students moving those leftovers from point A to point B. Again, it's a partner on the other end. And when you have all these different pieces, there's a lot of complications. There's a lot of different sections that you have to think about with service and how it connects to waste reduction on the group level, on the broader level, and now that we're in this virtual space, of how disconnected we are. So I think of even last year, I was really focused on proper recycling. I was focused on resource utilization, thinking like to-go containers in dining halls. And now this summer, people are all across different communities, especially our students, and they may not have recycling programs where they are, or they don't compost, or the rules have changed. And how do you engage those folks through these changes and recognize that volunteers are still such a big part of this waste reduction movement? There was a case study out of Vancouver that found how important peer educators were for volunteers and waste reduction. They realized the emphasis on empowerment was super, super important. And so being able to say, like, this is how you recycle, this is how you reduce using certain things, they found useful to kind of like that train the trainer model. And without that, their community was really struggling. And so having the ability to really empower volunteers, then go out and empower others, was one of the things that really made their waste reduction movement successful. And so question I have for everyone here in the discussion we're going to have today is really, what is the connection between volunteers and what that really means, and the connection between waste reduction and the waste reduction movement?
It's such a big question, I think.
I know. Well, that's the thing. And I think it even comes back down to like, what is service and what you consider service too, because on one side, the person in the break room that's doing the sorting, that might not be considered traditional service. You're not signing up for something. Not everyone sees you doing it, although maybe people know you're the person that does it. But then there's also those one-time pieces, or the ongoing volunteers, or the peer educators that are signing up for these more formal programs, which most people consider as traditional community service. And so you think about what service is, that completely alters the relationship between waste and volunteers. And you think of, what point does it go from service to responsibility? And that's something that I think about a lot, not as an institution, but just thinking about organizations and businesses. At what point do you go from, this is a volunteer situation, to you have a responsibility as an organization and a group to be a part of this waste reduction? And I don't think there's an easy solution to that, unfortunately, but it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had. And I think now is a great time to do it, because everyone's looking at products that they're bringing in. People are looking at their systems. They're thinking about what do I need to make certain structures work, traditional, new structures, and how volunteers fit into that.
Yeah, I think it is such a big umbrella question to consider. And I think now would be a great time to maybe go into some of the questions that you prepared, because now that we have the idea and the topic laid out, it would be kind of good to get into some of the meat. Because as you said, there is no one solution, and it is such a broad, hard to define topic. All right, so your first question was, what role do volunteers have in the waste reduction movement? So do you want to go ahead and answer that, what you think?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm also curious what people think their role is. So please put it in the chat of what you think the role is of volunteers in the waste reduction movement. But I always think of, is it kind of like the cheater's way of getting around our waste problem? And I say that because we rely so heavily on volunteers. They're not paid individuals. We rely on individuals getting involved in this waste movement. And is that the way we should be going about it? Or is there a better, more systematic kind of structural way of going about waste reduction? And especially on a college campus, I think of, students, a lot of campuses, I've heard this, not just at mine, I've heard this across the board, where students will say, oh, things aren't actually being recycled. Or, oh, like that, don't worry about it, someone else will sort it for you.
Yeah.
And like, I think, well, if we had a really strong peer educator program, maybe some of those myths would be busted, because people feel empowered to correct others when they say, oh, we don't recycle. Someone can be like, no, we do recycle. And this is how it's done. In which case, that's a huge win for an institution or an organization, because then they can say, you have allies across a network that can really feed into a movement and keep it moving. So the peer education, I think, is a huge part of that in that sense. And then there's also a lot of benefit of having folks participating in being almost role models through volunteering. So I think of, you see that one student in a residential hall going to recycle their textiles, or using a thrift store, or swapping clothing for an upcoming formal. And that all gets people thinking of like, oh, how can I also contribute to that? Not even from a sustainability mindset, but just from like a resource or financial or social aspect. And that's huge in sustainability, is making those intersection connections. And so to me, it's, volunteers have a huge role. They have a huge role in moving our waste reduction movement forward. But it's also, I think it comes to the question of like, how much? No, I don't think anyone's really studied it. I know I personally have not studied it. I'm talking really from my own experiences. I know, I was talking to some folks early before this, and we were saying we did a Google search and there's not a lot out there about it, which was surprising. But in just my kind of day-to-day role, it feels like volunteers are really pushing the movement forward.
Yeah, one of the things that I thought of when you first asked this question and brought up the topic was, I feel like volunteers are kind of the basis for any kind of specifically waste, or many waste programs, if not a lot of sustainability programs in general. And I feel like it tends to be something that, you have a volunteer start doing, and then it becomes very difficult then to make a business case for, we should be paying someone to do this, or we should find another way to incorporate this into our operations, because volunteers are doing it, and it's a kind of like, if you're an employee and you take on a bunch of work and you just continue at that level, and then everybody's like, well, they don't need a break, they're doing great, so give them more work. And I feel like it's such a catch-22, because you're like, oh, this is awesome, but it's also kind of a detriment to the program and to forwarding the program. But as you were saying, I feel like, I was thinking at Johns Hopkins, we use volunteers for a lot of stuff. We use volunteers for, our education programs. The sustainability office uses volunteers for their green team programs. None of this is something that people are getting paid for. It's just something that they are personally passionate about and want to advocate for. And I wish that there was a better way that we could make mandates and policies. And I saw somebody mention in the chat room about this. Leanna, is there anything that you want to add based off of what people are mentioning there?
Yeah, I actually have a couple thoughts, and then I did copy and look at some of the chats. I wanted to say that I think, like, when your university or your organization relies solely on volunteers, like, that is making a statement that they are putting their resources to some other purpose, right? So, the resources that they're getting for free of volunteers, they're going to just, then, where universities oftentimes put their money is a direct correlation of what they value. And so I think, anytime that volunteers are bearing the brunt of all the work, that's a problem. I do think volunteers are critical in piloting. So, you know, you need to prove that this program is worth, you know, the commitment, the resources, the attention, the bandwidth of your university, your leadership, your community. And so volunteers are really great for piloting some things, you know, like for example, you know, piloting our move out program. You know, we relied solely on volunteers for that. And then after a few years, when we were like, okay, we can only get so many volunteers. And by the way, like, this is a challenge given like the time of the year. And so our housing department was like, okay, we're going to pony up the money, because they had seen over the course of, you know, 5 years, the value that that move out program gave to them. And so they're going to expend their resources. And then I'll just quickly say, so we can get on to the other comments, is that I think also there are a lot of people on our campuses that want to engage, but have very varied interests, right? So there's our core group of like our, you know, green student union groups, or, you know, our green team members and our staff, and, you know, those folks that are kind of like always there. But I do think that like some of these volunteer, like maybe some of the larger volunteer events, give those students who are not able to devote a lot of their time to this particular issue, but it's still important to them. And so the volunteer opportunities give them a chance to still engage, you know, on that level, not necessarily just from like a behavioral standpoint, but from like, you know, I want to show my support. I think this is an important program. I just can't always, you know, dedicate all my time. And I think that shows to your university leadership, you know, when you have an event and you have 50 or 100 or whatever, you know, your metric is, your bar is for volunteers, that is really important in terms of showing, it's a powerful tool in showing, you know, that you have support. And that can be used, I think, in when you go to ask for the resources or the space or whatever it is that you need for additional integrated programs, as opposed to what may be seen as an add-on. So if anybody feels like they want to just jump in and talk, that's great. We really are like pushing that. We want this to be a conversation, but I'm happy to also look at the chat comments. So if you wrote in the chat box and you want to just vocalize your own thoughts, go ahead. Otherwise I'll read some. So I'll give you like some time to think that over.
I'd like to say something. So I'm one of the green team volunteers. And the thing is, it's great to be a volunteer. There are about 5 people who have passion, but I think it can easily become drudgery. If I'm the only one who's sorting the trash, and I'm the only one who's saying we need to get a pickup, and I'm the only one, I become a harpy and not I might not be really helping the cause when I become beleaguered, right? And my colleagues are just like, she'll take care of it. It is back to this point that I think at some point the organization has to put some money down and say, we're going to pay people, students, we're going to pay somebody to do this. And also in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, suddenly do they just see me as a custodian of the floor because I'm always doing the trash thing? Like, and that isn't great for my self-esteem.
You do a lot, Anne. And we thank you for that.
My name's Kathleen, and I work on the hospital campus, but I live on the Homewood campus, and we had a great move out program for a while. It used to be a horrible problem. When all the students moved out, they just dumped everything in the alley. It was a huge mess. But we had a community liaison named Carrie who was amazing, and she really worked with the community. She used to organize like frat and sorority cleanup days, and but anyway, I think she was very involved in that, and when she left, it didn't continue. So that's the danger of relying on one passionate person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, if it wasn't part of her job description and she just did it because
no, it wasn't. Yeah.
Right. So the next person who took the job, they were like, well, that's not in the job description. I'm not doing it.
You're exactly right. Now, the good news is, Kathleen, we did pick up that program. And so we do have a green move out program that Bridget and I work with our housing and offices of sustainability and res life. And so we do have, it just doesn't, it's not as community forward facing, because we had that big sale that does require.
Yeah, it used to be the big sale.
Yep. We don't do that side of it, and we'd love to do that side of it, but I just want you to know it's not totally gone.
So what happens to all the stuff?
It goes to different Goodwill or project plays and nonprofits that we work with. But I think you bring up a really great point, and that is that if you rely on one person, just like Anne or you or anyone else or Carrie, if it's not either in your job description or there isn't someone dedicated, then it does fall apart when they leave. And so, you know, that's critical.
No, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and opinions. Very good. Before we get into any other questions, I wanted to note that I just shared the poll results with everyone. I want to specifically talk about does your neighborhood community have a waste reduction program? And most people are saying yes. Some people are saying unsure. Good to know. And then the last question that I asked, and I apologize that I didn't give you the option to select multiple, which was please select any of the following waste reduction or diversion activities that you've volunteered for in the past. And so it looks like a lot of people have done office home cleanouts, which makes a lot of sense because I'm feeling a lot of you guys are staff. But then also litter pickups, move out programs, a couple event waste diversions, food donations, others. I'd be curious if you are somebody who did other, please feel free to mention that in the chat. And then we do have a good portion of people that have done none of them, which is totally fine. You know, we're here to share and encourage and inspire. So I am actually, before we get into more questions, going to put forward another set of polling questions that we had some interest about. So I'm going to launch those now. So please feel free to answer those and chime in whenever you'd like. Cathy, let's talk about, you said one of your questions was, I like this one. How does one-time community service events like a student move out influence individuals to change their waste habits, or do they at all?
Yes, I love this question too, because I think as a person in the Office of Sustainability, I often find one of the goals of these one-time events is the behavioral change piece or the education piece. And I see them as a great entry point for folks who may not traditionally participate in waste, but I don't necessarily see it as that pivotal moment where the majority of people participating will now engage in waste reduction. But the hope is that they'll see how easy it is, or they'll learn some piece, a little piece, but a piece of the puzzle. So for instance, waste, like maybe it's the process of going through your clothing and realizing that it's really simple to drop off just clothes at a thrift store or swap them. Maybe you're not ready for the small electronics. Maybe you're not ready to go through your gaming collection, but you're ready to look at clothes. So at least you get like a piece of that. But I know I struggle with seeing the long-term impact, even if it's a one-time event that happens multiple times. So I think of like reusable to-go containers at schools. There's often some kind of distribution process at the beginning of the year, and students are really excited about it. They're like, oh, this is great, reusables. But then you'll notice around, say, week 8, all of a sudden they're lost, or half of them are gone, or like you just don't know where they went. I mean, there's conversations of like, how do we lose thousands of containers? Yeah. And clearly the behavior was not learned in that process. And that could be argued as both ongoing and non-ongoing. But to me, like, you have a big kickoff event, we're like, yeah, enthusiasm, we're excited. And then you see it kind of just fade away. And so there are definitely benefits. I wouldn't say like, let's nix the one-time events, but I don't think that is the solution to long-term behavioral change. What about you? Has someone else had an easier experience where they did it once and everyone just started doing different behaviors, or they found like it really was successful for them?
That is one of the questions in the polls that are out right now. So I'm still, about half of the people have completed them. So I'm going to wait for a little bit longer before showing the results. You know, Leanna and I often talk about, especially with giving out like reusables and like giveaways, what the benefit is. Are people actually going to use them? And we're always like, how do you measure that? And there is no way to measure it really, unless you have people like that you follow up with, and that's just, it's a lot of work and people just don't usually do it.
Yeah, and you know what's really funny? It's not funny. It's so frustrating. Is that we actually, for the first time, and if anybody else has incorporated some sort of like follow-up metrics to better track how effective your giveaway programs are, please share with us. But we started to do it for the first time.
And then COVID happened.
We had a bag giveaway event because Baltimore has passed a plastic bag ban. And so we gave away bags, and we got everybody's information, and we said, do you agree for us to follow up? And our plan was to follow up with everybody every month to kind of like get some anecdotal information as to whether or not they were continuing to use those. But obviously that didn't happen. But I think, to your point, Cathy, like, how can we make one-time engagement opportunities either, generally we collect people's information at some of our events, like you can get something free if you sign up. I mean, and again, Bridget and I have really steered away from that, but like, how can you continue to keep them into your sphere of communication or engagement so that, they don't just take something and walk away, or get some information and walk away, or donate something and then not realize that the whole point of having the collection at move out is not to give away to charity, it's to keep it from the landfill, but eventually hopefully not make people realize how much stuff they're bringing that they don't need, and actually reduce from the beginning. So anybody has had like some success or ideas on really how to make those singular engagement points, touch points, expand out to longer, either it doesn't always have to be engagement with us, it could be just deeper behavior change.
Looks like Amy has her hand raised.
Hello. I just wanted to, I guess, put out an idea that I've not had firsthand experience with any of these giveaway type opportunities, but I wonder from the faculty side of things, if it's an opportunity actually for creating a connection between those of you who are in kind of campus life aspects of this and potential class connections. That I know I was on a different meeting with Cathy earlier today where we were talking about some things like this. And for example, at Holy Cross, we have a freshman kind of seminar program for our first year students. It's called Montserrat, that is thematic and that often deals with issues of social responsibility and connects to ideas of environmentalism. And I wonder if it could be an opportunity for rolling something like this out on a smaller scale, but that was targeted towards connecting to an educational goal. And that maybe part of the carrot is that your professor says you have to hold on to that recyclable container for the entire semester for an extra, I don't know if it's about points, I don't know if it's about some kind of appropriate carrot that does not penalize those students who are not able to. But I wonder about opportunities like that somehow allow kind of the two hands of the academic beast to talk to each other and work cooperatively, because I feel like that would suggest a different level of investment from everybody on both sides of that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I know recently at our environmental studies retreat at Holy Cross, we were talking about incorporating some kind of participation points with an action. So like reusable containers, or basically our idea, we're talking about bringing behavior home. So having your family unit, whether that's your actual family in a virtual learning situation, or say your roommate family in your residential hall situation, but trying to get it so it's like a group effort within the classroom. We had, I think, a lot of excitement around that. I think a lot of professors were really excited about the idea that you could apply, real world changes to their educational learning. And it also gave something to talk about throughout the semester that was a little simpler. It wasn't quite as theoretical based, but it's something that people could get behind. I think Sylvia is in here somewhere. She had a really great example if she wants to share it. But yeah, it was definitely something that at least for Holy Cross, we were really excited. We're like, this is something we feel like we can do really easily, no matter what our learning, environment is.
I'll also just say, I think, Amy, I think, regardless of the cultures on your campus, tying things with academics can be very effective. I think specifically at some universities where it may be a little bit more, maybe a little bit more of a culture and pressure that, like at Hopkins, I think there's a normative effect that when it's within an academic setting, and then it sort of raises the bar, it raises the importance of that act and of that like the culture and the expectations of our core values when it's in an academic setting. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to have students volunteer through an academic a course as either a requirement, whether it's like service learning, or whether it's just a one-time, like we're all going to go to this lecture, or we're all going to go to this event or volunteer event, that the simple act of going that one time, that if you went on your own may not have the same effect as if all of your peers are doing it, who are not necessarily already engaged in that kind of like world and work. And you're getting a silent signal sort of from your academic, your peer, your academic, people that you look up to. And again, it's sort of like sanctioned by the academic side of campus, as opposed to this extra thing that, if you're part of this kind of group, or, you act and live this way, then it's something that you would normally do. But it really normalizes those expectations when it's being supported and encouraged by, I think, the academic world.
If I may, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you, Kathy, for the shout out. Because it was fun in my class. We actually, for a couple of weeks, I think for 4 weeks, I kept a log of various aspects of the class, how long people took showers. And it really ranged from 2 minutes to 20 minutes. And the people who did 20 minutes, within 2 weeks, they were down to 10. Not that that is that fantastic, but it was, they really loved, talking about this. And one woman who was a pescatarian turned vegetarian. A lot of my guy students tried it and would say, oh yes, we feel lighter, but we don't have as much energy. But they were thinking, they were trying these things out. And the other aspect that I really enjoyed was I gave everyone points towards participation. So people who went got extra points, people who didn't, no problem. But when I sent people, we have a fall break, people went home, talked to their families. And it turned out that a lot of the grandparents had grown up with so little. And so they were very much on board with this new waste less, reuse, make do. And oftentimes when I've talked about this, people think it's the grandparents who are the hardest to reach, but they're the most resonating soundboards for the students. And so that was really eye-opening also to me. So, so that has really worked well, also in terms of creating a community for the first year students, getting to know each other through very sort of non-academic topics, even though my course was on the environment, but it was very applied and it was something we kept coming back to. And a colleague of mine then we wanted to have a project called How Low Can You Go? Sort of have dorms compete against one another in terms of electricity and water use. But a colleague also collected data, and we wanted to measure the whole semester if people used less apart from the competition, and then, hold on a second, generated actually the carbon footprint for the students. If they changed a little bit, it made a big difference. So individual actions accumulated. So that was a wonderful result. So thank you for the shout out, Kathy.
Anne in the chat box mentions World War II and I and II, and some of the economic and cultural expectations and requirements of that generation, and how that carries through. And your grandma or grandpa like saved everything, and then the next generation
everything.
And so I wonder, we talked a little bit about COVID-19 last session, but I wonder if this generation, whatever we're calling them, iGen or whatever, that it's growing up in this will be a pivotal moment, not only for sort of seeing some of the like critical environmental outcomes, unintended consequences of COVID, but also in the service. So we're also seeing a lot of people as a result of COVID-19, even though there is a concern about safety, but a lot of people are, giving what they can, whether it's like, monetary, or people really kind of coming out and giving blood and feeling that they have an obligation to do better for their common humans. So I wonder if, when we see that in a generation like World War II, generation, that maybe we'll have a resurgence of some of those positive impacts of like the negative things that were happening in our world at the time, in our iGen.
I think no, that's a great point, Leanna. And I know we did kind of discuss last week about how is waste going to be impacted moving forward, and are people going to be more conscious about climate issues? And obviously people are more conscious right now about racial issues as well. And how can we kind of use what the awareness that's going on right now to continue to push forward these other equally, if not more important issues as well. I don't, I think that that's still out there for debate. I think, I wonder if more people will start to, or I'm hoping that it will continue after COVID, all of this volunteering efforts and migrate into the waste stream as well.
I think it's a great segue to the next question, which is,
yes, real quick, I'm just going to share, I'm going to end the polling and then share the results as well, just so that people can see them if they're interested. But yes, go ahead to the next question.
So the next question, Kathy, was, do community members and or organizations have a responsibility to their community to minimize waste? Is this responsibility or service?
Yeah, and I think this goes back to your point earlier of at what point do you switch from volunteers in like a pilot kind of setting to paid employees, or like a true formal paid program initiative? Because I think of institutions, and there's so many different pieces at play. They're almost like their own little mini neighborhoods going on. And so you have food, you have office supplies, labs, you have athletics. There's so many different things coming and going just in regards to stuff on campus. And so is it an organization or an institution's responsibility to keep track of all of that and do what they can to reduce the amount that's coming on campus and reduce the amount that's leaving to a landfill or incineration situation? And I mean, again, I don't think there's an exact answer. I think depending on who you ask, some will say it's absolutely a responsibility of an organization or an institution. And I think others will say, no, it's on the individual or it's on the provider. So think of packaging. I was just talking to some folks earlier this week about how vendors give you so much packaging when they drop some stuff off? And is it really the vendor's responsibility to reduce the amount of packaging? And is it the institution's responsibility to put the pressure on those vendors to try to minimize the amount of packaging that they're offering? And when you think of the waste kind of cycle, I don't know if anyone's seen like the story of stuff or the story of plastic, where they have a very nice diagram of how you cut out the different sections. And I mean, it's tough. There's so many different moving parts that a lot of different people could take responsibility along the line. And so when we come to this volunteer idea, there's definitely a place for volunteers. I think they're very important in the waste reduction process, as we've said, through piloting, through empowerment. But there's also a lot of responsibility on institutions to make vendor choices. There's a responsibility on institutions to make structures where it's easy to recycle. Or if an institution or a community or an organization says, we have a recycling program, making sure that that recycling program is accessible, and making sure like the bins are standardized or there's signage so people know how to use them. So it's not just like, here's a bin, we're recycling now, which definitely does happen. And I know I'm guilty of doing it in some situations when you're in a hurry and sometimes you forget that not everyone knows how to recycle. So it's definitely complicated, but I think there's a balance between responsibility and service.
For sure. Oh my gosh. I think you hit on a lot of really great points about how it seems like, you know, institutions should, it's a responsibility of institutions. And when it's kind of maybe individual, maybe it's service. But I feel like the institution needs to make it accessible to do the service. But they should also probably make it less of a voluntary thing and more of a mandatory thing, especially at an institution level. Some of the things that you were talking about, like having either reusable or recyclable packaging, things like that, would make some of our lives on the purchasing and something that Anne mentioned earlier, you wouldn't have to feel like the recycling Nazi if things were packaged more easily to be recycled more easily, then we wouldn't have to have special collections for everything and wouldn't have to have a volunteer person be like the lead in the office to say, okay, that's not how you do this, that's not how you do this. Everything could just go back to where it came from or be recycled in our mainstream efforts. I think that's a question about like externalities. When we talk about businesses, they just aren't taking these things into consideration. And I think this kind of takes us to our last question, which I want to talk about, and I'm going to put out polling questions. If you have to leave, feel free to head out. We're going to finish up with one more question, and if you could just finish these poll questions before you head out, I'd really appreciate it. But if you can hang around, we'll probably stay for about another 15 minutes. But I want to put this question out. How can organizations transition volunteer impact into policy and systemic changes? It's a very loaded question, but very important.
Well, I think scaling, we talked a little bit about scaling, that's important, especially as an academic institution. If we can show it worked in one residential hall, one dining facility, we can show that it's scalable and replicable also. So that's one thing. Two, institutions have a lot of really strong ties to their community, and that advocacy piece is huge. And so not just individuals, yes, but also groups of being able to say, this is what we're doing here at Holy Cross, at Johns Hopkins. How can we partner in the community to push things forward? I know a lot of conversations about compost happen and how there is no composting facility. So that's, again, where the advocacy could come through of, well, we're really committed at this institution. Our volunteers have shown through the Food Recovery Network, through kind of like other forms, that this is an important issue for us. you know, like, let's move this in a different direction. So there's 2 examples. And then going back to that empowerment piece, it's a ripple effect. You know, if you can get 10 people on campus, 10 new allies on campus really excited, maybe if they're faculty and staff, they go home to their families who are community members, or if they're students, they go to their classes or their athletic teams or the student groups, and that ripple effect just grows and grows and grows. And that's a piece of the systematic change, of getting enough people to participate on an individual level to provide the pressure about packaging, to properly recycle so the systems work, to maybe volunteer at the next thing, so you have an ongoing supply of future volunteers. So I think those are just 3 off the top of my head that are feasible. They're actually doable transitions that any of us can really promote and participate in.
I just want to point out a couple of, about 20 minutes ago, Susan Schuler said she thinks that it's helpful to document the metrics of any of our volunteer programs. And I think that that's, you know, critical, Cathy, in sort of taking, you know, making the case, whether it be a financial case, which, you know, oftentimes it's really not. And, you know, we try not to base our programs on the potential financial savings, because you see what happens when the recycling markets crash. But there are, you know, other financial, you know, cases that can be made. So, but, you know, it could be, again, just like that, the number of supporters that you have, you know, in the volunteer hours, like how many hours are people giving to this project when they could be doing something else with that time, to the betterment of the university. You know, so we need to value those hours that staff are giving, you know, people like Anne, you know, and everybody else on the call who's spending that time at work collecting all these things, you know. Now, maybe, you know, it's catch-22. Maybe you don't want to show, you know, your supervisor how much time you're spending during work hours doing that. But I think you know, again, however you can document and make a case, whether it be financial or what have you, can help, you know, take that to leadership and transition into making what was a volunteer program more integrated into either someone else's job responsibilities or just the expectations in the way campus operations or purchasing those decisions are made.
Yeah, Leanna, you kind of piggybacking off of that statement. Oftentimes you and I at the end of the year, I know for sustainability at Johns Hopkins, we have a awards, and the sustainability office is always asking for people to nominate individuals who are, you know, being great advocates of sustainability on campus. And some of the people that Leanna and I almost immediately are thinking of are all the people who are the putting in recycling requests for their offices, you know, and a lot of them are, I'm pretty sure most of all of them are doing it out of volunteer and just passion and advocacy for what we do and for recycling and environment. And so, you know, that in and of itself is just one way we measure it. But again, for the people out there doing it in their own groups, measuring it, you know, including that in your performance evaluation. We have those at Hopkins. I don't know if you guys have them at Holy Cross, but you know, mentioning that, because I think it is important, and it comes back to the university or the college's values, and should be represented. Another thing that I was thinking of, though, with regards to this is something that Sylvia mentioned is, you know, and Amy, thank you, by kind of by having students participate in these behavior change practices and volunteering almost kind of experiments, I think it kind of instills in them, at least it provides awareness to them, and it provides the opportunity for them to try it out and be aware. And I think if nothing else, you know, that is providing the opportunity, especially over a semester or over an extended period of time versus a one singular volunteering event, you know, you potentially are training them in a sense to go out and instill these kinds of values in whatever business that they're going to potentially run or be an employee of. And so that would just be one more way to kind of help transition to creating less of a voluntary role, but more of a responsibility role for institutions and things like that. That was long-winded, sorry.
I think you bring up a really good point though, in terms of like performance evaluations. And, you know, if we aren't, some responsibilities we should socialize across the board, right? Some of them we should create new positions for, but some of them should be expectations, core values. And that's one of the things, you know, that we're doing in our Sustainability Leadership Council in our employee engagement is how can we create sustainability in our core values so that that down the chain in your, you know, performance goals or your job responsibilities, there is something in there that relates back to sustainability. So again, you're setting the norms, there is accountability, and it doesn't fall on the shoulders of just the passionate person. Like everybody is expected to, you know, and it's, you know, could be entirely up to the person that makes sense for their job or for what they're interested in. It doesn't have to be, you know, waste specific or climate specific or whatever, but that it's incorporated and integrated into the core values of the university and the expectations that every supervisor has for their employees. And again, back to Anne's point is that, like, you know, she feels like, you know, sometimes people are taking advantage of her or, you know, looking down on her for what she's doing, as opposed to expecting that everybody do this. And when you look at the people who are not contributing, it's kind of like, well, somebody's not going to do well in their performance evaluation. Maybe we're not there yet, but I think, like, again, like sort of like the democratization of these behaviors is critical in normalizing it. Any other last thoughts?
Yeah, anybody have anything else they'd like to share?
Feel free to unmute yourself.
All right, well, that was great. And you know, I know we went over, I'm kind of my hard stop. Sorry, did somebody want to say something? Okay, well, thank you all again for attending this evening's social. Thank you so much for Cathy for presenting a great topic and awesome stimulating questions. You know, I hope we all have something to think about moving away from this conversation. Thank you all for completing the polls. If you haven't, please go ahead and do that. I'm going to put out a promo for next week's topic. So please join us next Wednesday at 4. Our host will be Lindsay Hutchison from the University of Texas at Austin, and we'll be discussing recycling right, the realities of the recycling system, which should be a great conversation about waste sorting, why certain things can and cannot be recycled. Something that at Hopkins we've been talking a lot within the last year since National Sword started. But I'm sure there'll be a lot of details and things for us to get into. So again, thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at bgregor9@ghu.edu or on Facebook or social media at Homewood Recycling. And again, thank you all and have a good evening.
Thanks,
Hopkins. Thanks, Lacrosse.
Thanks everybody for participating.
Awesome. Thank you again, Cathy. It was great to talk with you. I feel like we had such a great conversation. I'm going to stop recording right now before I forget. I never know.